Hi, everybody. This is Todd Creager, and today I want to talk to you about childhood trauma and intimacy struggles. Many of you that have been following me know that I'm a couples therapist. I work with trauma as well. Let's combine the two, as I oftentimes do in my practice, because they are intertwined. I have found that people come to me with intimacy issues such as we don't communicate, we can't communicate well, or intimacy avoidance, sexual avoidance. Of course, I talk a lot about infidelity, but today I'm not focusing on that as much. That could be a byproduct of what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about today is just the inability for two people to have intimacy. Intimacy is the ability to have a deep relationship where I can be vulnerable with you and you could see me, see into me, and you can be vulnerable with me and I can see into you. And we're creating a safe place to go deeper, both verbally and physically. And I would say, along with that, emotionally and maybe even spiritually. It's about depth and there's a sense of if you've had moments of depth in your life where you were able to share something really important with someone else and they made it safe for you to do that, or you did that for somebody else, or maybe you had just a real beautiful, loving physical closeness with another human being. You know what I'm talking about, those moments where there's intimacy. And many of us have challenges because we don't have the role models. Our parents, grandparents, ancestors didn't really have true intimacy. That we have come from ancestors that have been into survival to some degree and have postured themselves and cope with pain by covering it up or being very reactive in some way. But what we haven't seen is, for example, I joke around this all the time. You haven't seen mom say to dad, "I'm really angry right now." And dad leans over in his chair, very attentive, and says, "I'm here for you. Tell me why you're angry at me right now." We haven't seen that kind of connection where it's safe to have those kinds of strong feelings. Intimacy is the capacity to share painful feelings. It's also the capacity to share very loving feelings, compassionate feelings, and warmth, and just revealing yourself at a deep level to another person. If we have been abused or neglected, we learn to cover up, we learn to protect ourselves. If we have had, and I've talked about this before, attachment trauma, we develop parts of ourselves that are very protective, very protective. And these protective parts will oftentimes keep us on guard to get too close. Or it may make it difficult for us to be good listeners to the other person so they can feel close to us. We might be at the immediately just react real quickly. I know in my own personal case, I could share that I came from a family where mom put down dad and dad would yell at mom. And when I got married, and my wife had some complaints, some negative comment about me, I got very defensive. Now, that interfered with intimacy because it wasn't safe for her to be sad or hurt or angry at me or frustrated with me because I would right away get defensive. Why? Because there was a childhood part of me, a younger part of me, that felt unsafe with someone being upset because I saw what happened when my mom was upset with my dad. It wasn't good. They weren't connected. And so I didn't know how to be intimate with my wife when she was angry at me. That's something I had to learn. I had to become aware of this part of me, this younger part that panicked. And then that panic would turn into oftentimes anger, shortness, judgmental, minimizing what she did, all those things. These kinds of lack of healthy role models. Love my parents, but look, that's when they were born. They didn't have they didn't have all these relationship coaches and therapists and books and that we have now. Even with all those books and that, we still have a long ways to go because we have to apply it. We got to do the work. We have to develop the emotional muscle to learn how to not let these protective parts run the show. We need to appreciate those protective parts of us. I had to learn to appreciate that part of me that would get defensive and understand it was just trying to protect this more vulnerable part of me, this more vulnerable part of me that was really afraid I wasn't good enough. Seeing my dad would oftentimes feel not good enough. Just again, sharing a little bit there because it doesn't have to be infidelity. It doesn't always have to be some major abuse for us to interfere with intimacy. In those exchanges with my wife, I blocked intimacy. And she had other things too. When I've seen people where they have been abandoned, betrayed by parents or by other family members early in life as children, and they learn to be on guard and they have a very hard time trusting, right? Trusting, a lack of trust interferes with the capacity to be intimate. It interferes with the capacity to let the other person just be who they are. For example, I'm thinking of a client I had now who had a lot of disappointment and was treated very invisibly in her life, like she didn't matter. That's a trauma. That's a trauma. It's not always physical abuse, sexual abuse. That is a trauma for sure. But their parents, the dad was an alcoholic, the mom was preoccupied with just trying to survive and didn't have time to slow down and tune into her child. And this was the way it was, not just with her, but her siblings too. But she learned to be invisible. Well, she couldn't trust her partner, of course, fully in love stage and all that, but when they are committed, now she had a very hard time seeing him as someone that's going to see her as important. What happens? Here's what happens. She doesn't show much about herself and she lets it bottle up. And then she takes it on him. And then he starts to push her away to protect himself. Just to go into his situation, he had parents that yelled a lot when she would bottle it up and then raise her voice. If she couldn't be visible in a calm way, he would push her away. What would happen? She would feel more rejected, more betrayed. She would get angrier. So these are the things that happen. It could be a negative spiral. So let's talk about what to do about that. I could and will talk about these kinds of issues more in future videos. But for the purpose of this one, I'm just trying to say that, number one, we have to become aware of these parts of ourselves that protect ourselves because it was needed when we were younger. It just continues when we were older, and oftentimes it creates this self-fulfilling prophecy, like this couple, where suddenly she actually evokes in him the very thing that she's afraid of, which is pushing him away. He evokes in her the very thing he's most afraid of, which is a volatile wife, by pushing her away. This is what I see over and over. What are these parts of us? Let's get interested in it. That we learned, that we developed to protect ourselves because of whatever childhood issues, challenges, trauma that we went through. So first, let's become aware of it. The next step is to have compassion for these parts of ourselves, to not judge it, to not say, "Oh, what's wrong with me? I can't trust." That part of you is there to protect you. What's wrong with me? I constantly, as soon as I get any, like this husband, any intensity at all, I push her away. Why? Because the little boy part was scared. When he was little, he was helpless when his parents were fighting. So these are the things I see over and over again. So you want to be aware of it. You want to love it, appreciate it, get to know it. That part of I am here for you. And ultimately, as you pay attention to these parts that have interfered with intimacy, there's this part of you, and I'm telling you it's there, this healthy adult part. It's already there. It's like I always say, the sun's always shining even in the cloudy days, just the clouds cover it. The protective parts that were created to protect the real vulnerable places in you when you were traumatized are like clouds. Now, as we are aware of these clouds that are there to protect us, start to realize all along you have this capacity to give and receive love. And you do have the capacity for intimacy. You might need help to help you process trauma. You know, it might need help to not let these traumatic younger parts, if you want to call it that, hijack the conversation, hijack the intimacy. But you do have the capacity for that. Whether you do some of this on your own research and your own application or using a professional such as myself, you have that capacity. Almost everybody has the capacity. I'm not going to say, I will say that some people are very damaged and it takes them quite a long time, if ever, to be able to overcome that. But that's rare. So the great majority of us, the great majority of you that are hearing me, you have that capacity no matter what you think. And as you become aware, and then as you have compassion, and as you start to recognize that whatever this part of you that has compassion for these parts are the same part of you that can engage in healthy intimacy with your partner, can appreciate your partner's parts, can appreciate your partner's trauma, can understand that you shouldn't be taking a lot of these things personally. That oftentimes everything and anything your partner is saying and doing is to protect himself or herself, as you do. As you become more aware of it and you grow in compassion for yourself and your partner, now you can have true intimacy. This is when you start taking risks with each other. You start to not listen. You start to not say not listen. You start to recognize that the protective parts of you aren't so needed anymore. That you can take some chances. That you can create a new path with your partner, a path that you hadn't seen maybe your ancestors, your parents, your grandparents do. You can do this. You could evolve beyond your parents. You could have deeper relationships, more intimacy. You could be more open and more transparent. It's a process, doesn't happen overnight, but keep challenging yourself. Once you're aware of these parts and you're loving those parts and you're recognizing that there's a part of you that can handle things differently, like I was able to handle my wife's anger differently. I'm not perfect, but I'm definitely way, way better. And there's an adult part that's there. Child part doesn't hijack me like it used to. So I can be present and open and realize I am not in danger when my wife is angry. She just needs me to be there for her. And when you start to practice those things and then you start to get those positive results, and you start to realize that your relationship has a capacity to be so robust in its intimacy. And that is good news, no matter what trauma we've had. And help is there. People such as myself are there to help if need be. So that's what I wanted to say to you. Hope this was helpful. This is Todd Creager, making the world safe for love.